I'm Geoff Mulgan from Nesta, the National Endowment for Science, Technology and the Arts in the UK. Nesta is a public foundation which does a range of things ranging from commercial investment in early stage companies through funding quite a lot of social innovation projects, health, local government, education, creative industries as well, and we also do quite a lot of research. I'd say there's more happening, I think, in developing countries than in the developed world. Certainly, that's true in, if you go to, say, India or Bangladesh, this is absolutely mainstream. There's no boundary lines, as it were, between innovation in new schooling methods or hospitals or village-based water projects or village-based public health projects, or for that matter, village-based web projects. And my guess is that we'll see much more of the energy and creativity coming from particularly Asia and Latin America, and I hope increasingly Africa, feeding back into Europe and North America. I don't think that the North-South distinction makes much sense actually anymore. There's such a variety of different contexts, from, let's say, Bangladesh, where you have a fairly weak government, but very strong civil society organizations like BRAC and Grameen, which have filled all sorts of spaces, to China, where you have an extremely strong state, ruling Communist Party in a completely different context of innovation, through to, I guess, a country like Brazil, where a third of GDP is in the public sector, but it's a quite different pattern. So I think nearly all of those categories, developed, less developed, north, south, or even east, west, are breaking down. And almost every country turns out to have quite a different ecosystem of social innovation, a different balance of players, whether it's foundations and government and big business, or civil society, grassroots, community activism. And almost each place has to work out what institutions fit its context. And they'll be as different between Nigeria and Kenya and Pakistan and Vietnam as they are between Finland and Greece and Canada. Innovations can be good or bad. I mean, if you look at the innovation systems of the world today, they're creating drones to bomb people, surveillance systems to survey people, and all sorts of ugly things you could call social innovations from the past. I think innovation is a means and not an end. And if you don't have a sense of judgment, the ability to distinguish good from bad innovations, then that's a problem. But that's as true in technology as it is in social innovation. I'm very skeptical of the idea that we're creating tools which could be misused, because the ethos of almost everyone involved in social innovation is so profoundly democratic. It's about really opening up power over the shaping of society in ways which are radically different from the old models of highly centralized laboratories dreaming up technologies, or small cabals coming up with political programs in the capital cities of countries. Our ethos is so much more inclusive and open and democratic that it's quite hard to almost do the thought experiment: how would a fascist dictator actually use those methods for malign purposes? So I'm much more worried about us being insufficiently effective and impactful, rather than that we're coming up with ideas that someone's going to use in horrible ways against us. Well, SIX was sort of given birth about 3 or 4 years ago. I think what's fascinating is the pace of change, and in a way the mainstreaming of social innovations happened faster than I think we expected. It's certainly happening in government, where governments are becoming much more hungry for innovative approaches, partly thanks to the crisis. Business has adopted at least the language of social innovation much faster than we expected, though I think not necessarily the reality. And all over the world, sort of civil society, I think, is gaining in confidence. So we've had here the Social Innovation Europe project, which is really beginning to embed social innovation into things like R&D programs and investment and so on. The US has had an office in the White House, which wasn't there when SIX was set up. I've just been in India, which is creating a $1 billion essentially social innovation fund. No one was talking about that 3 or 4 years ago. So the field has come on a long way. I think there's also been much more cross-global learning than was happening a few years ago. People being willing to adopt ideas from Korea or Bangladesh or Southern Africa or Brazil and the US and use them in creative ways. But the very success, I think, of the field is also a challenge to it in terms of raising its game, in terms of impact, professionalism, effectiveness, etc. And that's what makes, I think, the next few years really exciting, but also quite challenging. I think the role that SIX has to play is not professionalising the field, because we're talking about lots of people are innovators in different ways, and it's not necessarily a profession where you have a certificate from a university. What I hope SIX is doing is creating a much more global sense of what innovation is about, so it's natural for people always to scan the world for promising ideas and approaches which they can learn from, rather than assuming the best ones will be in their own city, their own town, or in the traditional sources they've looked to. I think the second thing is getting a much faster exchange of understanding of methods, what works and what doesn't, methods of finance, methods of design, methods of scaling, where it's still the case that I think globally people are reinventing the wheel, perhaps repeating unnecessary mistakes, as a result of which far too many innovations don't make it from being an idea to having impact. And I hope the third thing is SIX can take that a stage further, partly helping to guide the big sources of power and money. So the work for the European Commission is a good example of that, coming up with specific recommendations on finance and metrics and so on, and maybe could be doing that in other parts of the world, but also helping to give birth to the Global Innovation Academy, which is really about skilling up initially hundreds, ultimately maybe thousands of people to be as effective at innovation in the social field as equivalent bodies support people to be really good at innovation in science and technology.